What is going on, people? Leo here from Creative Tech Lab. Today we have my favorite little camera right here, the Sony RX100 Mark VII, and I'm gonna give you 9 tips. Couldn't make it all the way to 10, but 9 tips in how to get better images and image quality in low light conditions with this little pocket point and shoot camera. So let's get into it. So just to give a little bit of background here, people that follow my channel know that I love this little camera, so it got me started here on YouTube. However, a lot of people gripe about the low light, or specifically the aperture. So on everything Sony did before on this camera up to the Mark V, the zoom range was 24 to 70 and the aperture range was a variable aperture of f1.8 to 2.8 from the widest to the longest there. Starting with the Mark VI last year, they changed the zoom range, which was amazing, from 24 to 200, which makes it way more versatile in terms of what kind of shots you could get. But that came at the cost of the aperture, which was bumped up to f2.8 to 4.5. So a lot of people were turned off by that. I don't mind it as much. I think it's worth the trade-off. But there are some little things that you could do, and I'm going to share 9 of them with you in what you could do in terms of being able to get the most out of this camera when it does start to get dark. By the way, before we jump into the 9 things, if it is that you are new here, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. And we talk a lot around here about run and gun videography, as well as some more content around other creative disciplines to come. So you will not be disappointed, and it would help me out greatly. So tip number 1, shoot on a f2.8 aperture. And that might seem really obvious to a lot of people. You're going to want to open the aperture as wide as possible as it can get, so you can let more light into the lens. However, I do know from shooting video with this thing in multiple different situations, you do kind of get, I don't want to say addicted, but you kind of want to get as close as possible sometimes to make it look a little bit more cinematic. And then also at times to get that background compression, because even though you did lose some from the previous versions on the aperture, you also lose a little bit of the bokeh in the background, and you can make up for that by pushing in with the focal length, especially at some of the higher focal lengths. However, the drop off is pretty steep. You go from 24, by the time you get to 35, another popular focal length is already at 3.5. By the time you get to from 35 out just to 40, you're at f4, and then everything after 100 millimeters is f4.5. So you're essentially somewhere, once it is that you start to zoom in, you're actually somewhere between f3.5 and f4.5. So you're losing a little bit more light in the lens there. So what I would say is once it is that it does start to get dark outside, just don't zoom in, just keep it at 24 millimeters there. But what I can say is that you just need to get a little bit more creative with your shots. You're gonna have to get closer up to your subjects and stuff, and 24 millimeters is a pretty popular focal length. It is pretty wide, but if you think about it, a lot of the YouTubers on here with bigger camera setups are looking at their A7 III and the 24 millimeter G Master. So if they can get their shots at that equivalent focal length, then you can be more creative and just get closer to your shots. And the other benefit that you're gonna get by moving closer to your shots is you're still able to create some of that background separation once it is that you do get close up on your image there with this little camera. So once it is that it's dark outside, just try not to zoom in too much and just start moving around, move your body around, get low, get high, get close to get those shots. Tip number 2, you're gonna want to shoot in 4K 30 frames per second. This is for a couple different reasons. So in actual use cases of this camera, you're not using this in a professional setting. You're probably using it in a more family setting, more personal stuff, capturing family moments or whatever. You're looking for something that's better than your iPhone. So what I've normally found is that at nighttime, you're probably going to be maybe traveling, you're at a dinner, you're still sightseeing, whatever. You still might want to capture B-roll. And if you're like me, this camera does up to 120 frames per second in HD. But at nighttime, you're gonna wanna go ahead and open up your shutter speed as wide as possible. And if you're following the 180-degree rule, 60 is probably pretty good. Obviously, we'll get into where you could do 24 next after this. but if you could drop the shutter speed down to 60, you'll be letting more light into the lens there, which will help you out in the lower light conditions. And then shooting 4K, the higher resolution, I've spoken about this on things like the iPhone before, is with your smallest sensor, you want to shoot at the highest resolution as possible, because that's just going to give you a little bit more image quality, and it's going to help you out a little bit in the low light situations there as well. So 4K 30 is where I tend to shoot my B-roll at, and if it is that you're able to just get a little bit more deliberate and move a little bit slower with your motions when you're capturing those B-roll shots, then you can still slow it down by about 20%. If you move just a little bit slower, you could almost get this equivalent effect to slowing down to 50 or 40% like you almost would with a 60p image. So that's pretty cool there. So 4K 30 is tip number 2. Tip number 3, also related to shutter speed and also related to getting smooth shot there, is use a gimbal. So if it is that you're using a gimbal, you can still get some of your cinematic shots there. On even a lower shutter speed, you can shoot at 4K 24 frames per second. So you're getting a little bit more light there, dropping the shutter down to 1/50. And then you could be really deliberate with your motions and get some cool creative shots with the gimbal. And with this small little package here, gimbal I recommend is the Xeon Crane M2. This thing is so small it almost fits into your pocket, and with this small setup here, like, it's so inconspicuous when you're traveling. It is amazing. But once it is that you do that, you could still get some cool creative shots. You could do almost any shot that you could do with a bigger gimbal setup, and now you're able to do that at 24 frames per second live action and still get some smooth cinematic shots for your travel / family videos or whatever it is that you're filming. Tip number 4, find light. So find light wherever it is that you're going. Like, you're probably not in a complete dark area. Like, even when it is that I'm shooting inside clubs, even with this or with bigger setups or whatever, there's moving lights, there is static lights inside the club, even though it's really dark. Get as close to a light source in your area as possible. So in some of the clips that you see here, I shoot a little bit of B-roll for this video in particular, and you could see Keela here, she's out, and we just saw these decorative, what looks like Christmas lights, but this was shot a couple months ago. It wasn't Christmas time, but you see the lights out on the street. Other things you could get close to is storefronts, any kind of decorative lights, big signs, LED signs, or billboards or whatever it is. Just get close to light and then use that light source. Like, these lights that you see here are really tungsten, so they're not like great LED soft box whatever, but it at least allows you to light your subject and gets your image, and it kind of can help you create the vibe. If you put the right grade on it, then that tungsten could look all right, or you could change your white balance in post or whatever. But you're never ever shooting in just complete darkness, just moonlight out in the desert. So if you're in a cityscape or whatever it is, just try and find light and get your subject close to the light, and then grab your shot and then move on from there. Tip number 5, one of my favorite on the list, is use a low light profile. So the cool thing about this little Sony RX100 Mark VII, it is basically a pocket alpha camera. Pocket alpha camera would probably be a great name. Sony, use that one free of charge on me. Pocket alpha, your next pocket camera, whatever. But you pretty much have all the menu systems and options that you would in something like an A7 III or in an A9. So being here on the tube, I've come across a low light picture profile made by the big homie Josh Yo from Make Art Now, which he did for his Sony A7 III. But because you have all the picture profiles available to you there, it's on PP2. I will drop a link up above and down below of what that looks like. But here is just a couple of shots. So this one I actually got just last night, which is on the bridge here. One is in HLG, one is in the second one that you're seeing here is in the picture profile. And then what it is, I did shoot the B-roll. This is out with Kevin and Keela, and I did shoot that stuff here in the picture profile. So basically what this picture profile does is it kind of drops the shadows, it drops the detail and the saturation there, and it's also utilizing a less noisy and a smaller color space there. All this to just reduce the noise in the image. Once it is that you get into post, a lot of the noise reduction has already been baked into your image, so you're not dealing with a really noisy image. You throw a nice grade onto it, it expedites your process really, really well. Tip number 6 is to carry some small lights with you. This fits in your pocket, and you can also find some lights that fit in your pocket. So here in my background and now blowing out my image is the Aperture. This is the ML9. So you're gonna wanna walk with something, but something like this is so small you could stick it in my imaginary top pocket. It definitely fits into my pocket in my pants, and you could carry 1 or 2 of these, but if you're walking around with this, you could just kind of start doing one of these if you don't have a mount, or if you do have a cage or something like this on the RX100, you could use it there. But if you see from the B-roll here, when it is that we're standing on the bridge with Makila here, she is pretty dark. The lighting over there sucks. It's really tungsten or whatever. I was able to pull the light out and get some light on her face and expose for her face and have it look there. The ones that I have are the Aperture ML9. They're the older one. They cost a little bit less than the newer ones that are on the market right now, which I believe the MC is the newest one to come out that everybody has been talking about, and that one is RGB. But I haven't got my hands on that. But you could also, the decision I also made the other day is you can pretty much get 2 of these for the price of one of the new ones. So unless RGB is really important to you, then this actually works really well, and it comes in really clutch in terms of when it is that you're in a really dark situation like you're seeing here, like you just saw here up on the bridge. So bring some lights with you. Some people like the Lume cubes and stuff like that. They think those are really cool, but this is my weapon of choice in terms of portable lighting. Last couple of tips here might be a little controversial to the people that like to stick to rules, but we're breaking some rules here. So, or at least I'm telling you to break some rules, because that's what you're supposed to do as a creative. So first and foremost, like sometimes you're just gonna have to expose for your subject. I know a lot of people are looking at their exposure meter or looking at their histogram and seeing that their blacks are getting crushed. But if when you're in a low light situation, that is to be expected. Sometimes you're just gonna have to look and choose and say, hey, am I gonna be able to expose for my subject but not necessarily get all of the background in nice details there? Employ some of the tips there, but maybe you're not gonna get everything in your image, and that's part of being a creative there, is being able to look and say, well, what's important in the image when I have this small camera there? And then usually in my experience, when you're using something like this, it's for a personal event, it's for a family event, it's not professional work, as I've mentioned before. So expose for your subject, expose for whatever it is that is happening, and then not worry about the environment too much around it. Tip number 8. Break the 180-degree shutter rule. Like, you might need to get just that little bit oomph of light, and if you're shooting at 30 frames per second or 24 frames per second and you want to bump the shutter speed all the way down to 1/25, go ahead and do it. Like, it's not gonna make, I know you want to keep that cinematic blur, but even if I go here, let me see here, let me put that down to 25 and do that versus 50 and doing that. You want to keep your cinematic blur, and you want to keep it to as close as 1/50 or 180 degrees as possible. But if you need to get that little bit of oomph of life and you're not dealing with something that's moving too fast, then breaking that 180-degree shutter rule is something that you could definitely do. Just make sure that you're not dealing with somebody who's running or whatever, but especially if it's something that you're standing still and there's not too much movement in your shot, it will work like a charm. Try it, see what it looks like. You might even like it. Not to say you should shoot like that all the time, as I've said already, but it could work to your advantage and help you get what you need to get in a low light situation. And then tip number 9, if you're still here with me, thank you for the people that are still here with me. Tip number 9, bump your ISO up. I know there's gonna be a lot of people that tell you that they don't shoot over ISO 1600 or 2000 or 4000. Crank it up. The reason I say crank it up is this is why you bought an expensive point and shoot camera. It's going to still give you an image that is better than your iPhone. No, you do not have your A7 III or your A7S II with your f1.8 lens that you could get into, I don't know, the game or the club or whatever. Like, this is what you have. But bump the ISO up. It's not going to be too noisy, especially if you're using the low light profile and some of the other principles that we've already laid forth in this video. The other thing that you need to be mindful of is the vast majority of the people that are going to be watching your video, and that's not just what you're shooting on this, it's probably everywhere else. They're going to be watching on this, guys. They're going to be watching on a cell phone. And while the cell phone screen resolution is great, because it's a smaller screen, it kind of minimizes the noise a little bit, and it's not like you're watching it on a big 75, 82 inch TV or a big screen movie. You'll get there one day, but that's not where people are consuming the content that you'll be shooting with this type here. So don't be afraid to bump the ISO to get the exposure for your subject, because I can promise you with a little bit of noise reduction in post and employing some of the tips that we've had on here, you're probably going to get a really usable image, particularly for the type of content that you're shooting, which again, I would imagine is not something that is pro grade, but is probably going to be more personal. So hopefully you like this video. Again, I really love this camera. Do not let the f2.8 to f4.5 aperture steer you away from getting it if you really appreciate that zoom and if you appreciate the HLG profile. I'm gonna do my full review on it soon. I have a couple more comparison videos to do with this one before I decide if I'm actually even gonna keep the 7 or just keep the 6. But if this video helped you in any way, shape, or form, hopefully it did, please go ahead and drop it a like, hit the subscribe button and the notification. You know what? I'm not even gonna tell you what to do. You know what to do. If it is that you like the content, I'm not gonna force you to do anything, but there will be a lot more content to come specifically around this. I'm shooting on an A6400 now, so that's coming. The music content is coming. A lot more stuff is coming, so stay tuned. Thank you for rocking with me, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.